Okay, before we begin today's show, I do have a content warning for both of the episodes. Today we are going to be talking about The Walk and Oubliette, two season 3 episodes. Both of these do contain both mention and depiction of suicide or attempted suicide. Added to this, The Walk contains a scene in which a child is killed quite violently on screen, and Oubliette does contain some negative depictions, wrongfully so in my opinion, of mental illness. If you're sensitive to any of these themes, listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Things Are Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast. I'm Nick.
And I'm Kim.
And we are going to be working on our first Patreon exclusive Let's Play of the X-Files game this week.
Yeah, sorry, I a bit preemptively said on Twitter that it was going to be last week. We've had a few issues with the sound and figuring out how we do sound over a video, because that's new territory for us. So hopefully, now we've got the hang of it, it will be coming this week.
Whee. Otherwise, I think we're in the doldrums of news again.
Yeah, not much to talk about. Not much going on at the moment, is there?
No. I'm sure there'll be more to do later, if the reboot ever gets off the ground, or people get their warped wish for another film.
Of course, if you have anything going on, with the 30th anniversary coming up in September, do give me a shout on the social media. I'm happy to promote anything you've got going, any contests, any conventions, any just X-Files art you've got on the go at the moment. Just, as I said, give me a shout out on Twitter, Mastodon, Tumblr, and I'll talk about it in an upcoming show.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so our first episode this week is The Walk, directed by Rob Bowman, written by John Shaban, and first broadcast on the 10th of November 1995. Guest stars include Willie Garson as Quentin Roach Freely. He's done a lot of stuff, but only some of it we care about.
Okay.
So, he's in Groundhog Day. He's in the, I still love the name of this one, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. He was in Mars Attacks. He's in Being John Malkovich. He's been in Cheers. He was in Twin Peaks. He'll turn up in the X-Files again in Season 7.
The Goldberg variation?
As Henry Weems. He's been in Buffy, he's been in Voyager, and of course he's been in Pushing Daisies.
Ah.
He's in the one with the shop window.
Oh yes, I remember him.
Yeah. The other person of note is Thomas Capacci, who played General Thomas Callahan. He was in Star Trek Generations, and then got to be in Star Trek Next Generation and Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
He was also on The Tick.
Ah.
The
Live action?
Live action and the second live action one, not the Patrick Warburton one.
Oh, okay.
The Peter Serafinowicz one.
Yeah.
So, The Walk. In Maryland, Lieutenant Colonel Victor Stans makes a third suicide attempt after claiming a mysterious figure will not let him die. He attempts to drown himself in a tub of scalding water, but is rescued by hospital staff and disfigured after a fire alarm has been pulled. Stans again claims the figure will not let him die. Mulder and Scully interview him and discover that his wife and child died in a house fire, which he claims was started by a mysterious soldier. Captain Janet Draper stops questioning, because Mulder and Scully will not give him permission, and they ask to see the General Thomas Callahan, who is in charge. After meeting with the General, Callahan glimpses the Phantom Soldier, presumably the same one Stans has described. He finds his answering machine is replaying an unintelligible message. Later that night, while she's using the base's pool, Draper is drowned by an invisible force. Callahan tells the agents about the soldier and the voicemail, which he has received twice at his home. They visit his house when his young son Trevor believes he saw someone else sneaking around. Scully glimpses someone fleeing in the backyard, and fingerprints are subsequently lifted from the house. These are found to belong to the hospital mailman, Quentin Roach Freely. Mulder and Scully take Roach into custody, but while this is happening, Trevor is attacked and buried by an invisible force in his sandbox. With Mulder and Scully's questioning, Roach admits to his role in the deaths and states he is Rappo's mailman. Rappo is Leonard Trimble, a Gulf War veteran and quadruple amputee. Scully does not believe Roach, though he insists Rappo will kill him next. Scully then finds Roach dead in his cell with a bedsheet shoved down his throat. Scully assumes that he committed suicide, but Mulder shows her X-ray dental plates he has been carrying around since the start of the episode, and these have reacted in the pool, Callahan's office, Callahan's house, and all show signs of radiation. Mulder thinks Rappo is leaving his body with astral projection, and using a psychic connection forged through Roach's letters. He plays Callahan's voicemail backwards and discovers it's actually a threat from the Phantom Soldier. Under questioning, an embittered Rappo states his belief that the Gulf War took his life away. Meanwhile, Callahan finds his wife's dead body. He goes to the hospital to talk to Stans, who reveals that he knows who the Phantom Soldier is. When Callahan confronts Rappo, he openly admits his crime. Rappo tries to goad Callahan into killing him, but Callahan refuses and shoots over his head. Callahan threatens Rappo that he will suffer just like him and the others and leaves him. Mulder and Scully arrive and find Rappo in a trance. Scully suspects this as a seizure, but Mulder realizes that this is the astral projection and goes to find Callahan. In the sub-basement, Rappo's apparition attacks Callahan, while steam from all the pipes flood the corridor. Stan sneaks into Rappo's room, locks the door, and smothers Rappo with a pillow. As he does so, the apparition vanishes before it can attack Mulder, and Callahan remains unharmed. Given the lack of physical evidence to prove Rappo killed Callahan's wife and son, the case remains unresolved. Stans is released and becomes Callahan's mailman. Both Lieutenant Colonel and General acknowledge each other before the former leaves to continue his work. Mulder narrates that Rappo's family asked for him to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, but the Army refused and he was instead cremated. This is a better version of Excelsis Dei.
I absolutely agree with that.
Still got some problems with it, but it's certainly it's less gross and less just icky.
I think it's an interesting point that although we have another character who has the Ring of Gyges here, is that Rappo never sexually assaults anyone with that power, which immediately puts it worlds above Excelsis Dei.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's set up for it with the pool and everything, but no, he just straight out murders her.
There's a bit later where he makes a lewd comment towards Scully, but I got it more of the idea that he was trying to be disgusting to get her to leave.
Yeah.
As opposed to actually, because he makes the inference of saying, if I had that power, don't you think I'd be doing something else, inferring he could do this. But at the same time, he never does, so...
Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting that he's willing to murder men, women, children, leave soldiers alive, but then he has a line he will not cross, unlike the elderly people of Excelsis Dei.
Yeah. He's an interesting character as well. I think Rappo is a very complex villain. Surprisingly so for some of the ones we've seen so far in the X-Files, like Too Shy, that are very, very one note last week, is you've got this level of complexity because Rappo has a genuine grievance and he makes quite scathing criticisms of the way that the government treat veterans.
Yeah, and in terms of being an actor in the X-Files world, he's better at playing off that he has no idea what's going on than some of them, because he's actually really convincing when they approach him to say, oh, you're actually projecting out of your body.
To be fair, he's got quite a good argument against this, as Scully is not convinced, initially at least, by Rappo, because it's the whole saying that a man who's lost all his limbs is murdering these people and moving around freely is just a kind of lunatic claim.
Yes. This is just Tuesday to Mulder, though.
Yeah.
I did think criticism we had watching the episode is, and I think it's the weakest point really, is Roach feels like he's been inserted as a character just to give him something to do, as it were. Because his whole point is he's Rappo's mailman. Okay, so that means he's stealing letters from the victims that Rappo wants revenge on. And he gives them to Rappo, and we have to take Mulder's word for it that it's establishing a psychic connection with people.
They're a focus.
But it's where that kind of falls apart when you think about it is he's stolen letters. He's also stolen freshly delivered mail, we see quite clearly at Callahan's house. It's as a psychic link to a location. Wouldn't the thing that's been there for under 40 seconds be less good than a trinket? I mean, possibly they don't want to go into a squeeze and tombs direction of having the serial killer take an artifact. But as an anchor to a place, it feels more appropriate to have something that's been in there for a while than the mail that was delivered this morning, which should surely give you psychic emanations of that mailman.
My thought was a photograph, because you could easily have... They're all family men that he's targeting, a photograph of the whole family, which also gives him the focal point for, like, Callahan's wife and son.
Yeah, and it's really odd. I mean, I think also the apparition at the end is a bit confusing because he's fine just walking around the hospital. So presumably the implication is he could actually project, walk over to these people's houses, and then do it there. But I get the impression he's just sending his consciousness over there directly. But it still feels like it. It didn't feel like he needs the address so much as he needs a link to them. Or at least that was Mulder's thing. Maybe Mulder's just wrong, and all he needs is the address. But then Roach knows that to break into the house, so that can't be it either.
Yeah, it does look like it has to be something physical he's got.
It just feels like it's the weakest point of the episode. And it feels like Roach. I don't know. Was this in edits or something? Roach had a different role, and this is how he's wound up. And he's a very awkward kind of vestigial bit of something else.
You could still use Roach to steal from the houses in that instance. The entire point of him helping Rappo is we don't get all the ins and outs, but he's responsible for Rappo's injuries.
Or at least he blames him for it, and he does feel guilty for it.
Yeah, which is why, even though he knows that Rappo's killing these people, he'll keep helping them out of this sense of duty to him.
Yeah, I do wonder a bit if they liked the way you can phrase it as, I'm Rappo's mailman. And they got too much into that without thinking of, wait, how does this work?
Yeah.
Because it's a cool oblique phrase again, I'm Rappo's mailman. What the hell does that mean?
Mm. And it also helps make Roach look as guilty as possible when they break into his house and find this mail from all of these murder scenes there.
Yeah, and it's kind of odd though, because I think he's got too much mail though there, because I think he's just stealing other people's mail anyway, so...
You know that he's targeted 4 men and their families by this point, including Callahan.
He had too much mail in his apartment for it to be 4 people. Or four members of the military anyway. I think that's the only real bad thing about it.
That's pretty good for you if that's the only fault you can pick at an episode.
It's only a major one. I think my other one was, and I understand the whole he didn't expect to survive, it's the suicide attempt at the start of turning the water up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit.
I think it's he mentions repeatedly the fact that he, at that point, because we don't know it's Rappo, he won't let me die, is you've attempted suicide this many times, his entire family's dead, he just wants to die. He wants to be sure it will happen, so therefore he's pulling out all the stops. It's that I'm not just going to drown myself, I'm going to do it in boiling water. If one doesn't kill me, the other will.
True, although I do wonder why he didn't just crank the temperature up to the max, because that dial goes quite a bit further up than he said it.
Or something quicker. There must be a way he could throw himself out of a 5th floor window or something like that. Yeah.
Actually, I have realised the other weak point, and you did bring this one up as well, so that's not just me. It's the realisation that Stans has... Actually, there's another one on top of that, but... the realisation that Stans has that Rappo is the person who's threatening him. And it comes basically out of nowhere. He's wheeled into the medical bay, sees him, and reacts.
I've been thinking on this, but he did see the Spectre because he mentions it's a soldier standing to attention.
But you get to see what Callahan sees, and it's not Rappo standing there.
But sometimes it is. Rappo appears at different levels, and it does infer in the episode that Rappo can choose how visible he is. So I agree that it might have been slightly less clumsy if he recognised Rappo's voice, given that Rappo does speak to all the victims. But he did mention seeing a soldier, so it could have just been that he recognised that soldier. We don't see that bit. That's prior to the start of the episode.
It's true. Although, given they're both in the same hospital wing, you'd have thought they'd cross paths a bit sooner.
Not necessarily. It's a massive hospital, and they're in different departments, because Rappo seems to be in this area for people who have lost limbs.
Yeah. Okay, I will let that one go less bad. The other one, though, is a common fault, and there seems to be something to do with the writing, of catching people's names in some of these episodes is absolutely terrible. Because this one, it was a case of, it's General something, and that's Lieutenant Colonel someone, and she's Captain...
She was wearing a name badge, to be fair. I never managed to get a clear read of it. But, the guy who tries to drown himself at the start, I caught eventually that his name was Victor, but until you just said it in your description, I never caught his surname.
But I think they go right through the first, half of the episode, they don't mention him by name. I suppose that's one as well, is he's the sting at the episode. And they do a little bit with him at the start, and then basically forget about him until the climax.
Do you actually like this episode, Nick? You started saying you had one little thing.
I did. It bloomed.
I, personally, this has been one of my favourite Monster of the Week episodes, excluding the funny ones so far. I think it's a very sound episode. It's a scary episode, it's got a good degree of mystery, and it's got some really good special effects that have aged really well.
That's true.
I really do like the invisible man sort of effects we get for Repo in the steam and the water. I did find out how few of them were done. The effects where he's throwing people around are all done by a device called NARAM, which is something that projects actors into the air to get that idea that something invisible is throwing them.
Okay.
And the one in the sandpit was legitimately, they buried a stuntman in the sand. So, he could burst out on the command and you get that effect of the kind of humanoid shape shoving the stand over the little boy to suffocate him.
Okay.
But a lot of it, of course, is CGI. And as far as CGI goes, sometimes, particularly we noted like the worms in ice and things, it looks really ropey. But that effect's fine. It looks great.
Well, we've had a few years to get it improve it, so.
But yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm not going to pick as many faults as you on this one, I'm afraid. I think it's well acted, and I think it's a very dark, very intense, and very memorable episode.
It's very fair. I don't know if this one feels like Mulder's been reading the script, but it's certainly some logical leaps that are a bit. It's not as bad as the pilot, where he just says, out of the blue, that Billy Miles is the one who's responsible for everything. They are led towards Rappo a bit more gracefully than that, mostly through Roach.
Well, there are witnesses and Roach's testimony and things like that. Mulder doesn't pull it out of nowhere.
No, but his sort of wandering around with the dental plate the dental plate thing is fine, and I like it as a sort of test for weird radiation in the area produced by psychic energy. But it kind of feels like this should be a routine toolkit for him.
A bit like when he has his pocket watch for stop time.
Yeah, and I know it's got to be an invention of this episode because he hasn't done it before, and I'd be surprised if he does it again. But it's the kind of thing where you'd like to start building in, because by this point we've seen him assume something at the very start and be proved wrong relatively quickly. So I'd expect him to be more prepared to roll with the punches a bit more. So he starts off with one theory, and something comes in and he changes it. But also to talk to Scully more, because it's after Too Shy, where, oh yeah, this is a serial killer who's been working for months and I've been tracking him. And it was going, wait, what? Who? When did this happen?
Especially as we're getting into season 3 now and he's past the point where he doesn't trust Scully.
Yeah, it's... Again, I would put this down to the individual writers. Sometimes we know the script has been done earlier and it's been held back. 3 is the big example of that, where that felt so much like a season 1 episode when you actually look at it. But it was jammed in season 2. But I'm wondering how up to date some of the writers are with the episodes, given that they don't seem to have the progression of the relationship quite right sometimes. Mulder's being really cagey about some things and just hiding things for some reason, or is really reticent to sort of let his theories be discussed, even though he's pretty sure how Scully's going to react to his theory.
I think sometimes he likes that reaction as well, because he knows that Scully is going to say, astral projection, really, Mulder?
Yeah, it's just the whole, why wait, Mulder? You can just bring it on her early, then she can start thinking about the evidence and try and build towards consensus with you.
It's in the sense, it might be some writers misunderstanding Scully and believing that she plays the skeptic, which she does, she is the skeptic. But at the same time, Scully isn't trying to debunk Mulder, she's trying to find evidence that proves what Mulder is saying one way or the other.
Yes, well, she's trying, I think, well, to a point, but I think she's trying to prove the facts of the case, because Oubliette's going to be a real fascinating one for this in a minute.
I've mentioned it before, though, that Scully, in an early episode, says she is for the victims.
Yeah.
She doesn't really care if it's something weird or something mundane. She wants to prove what it is either way for their sake.
Yes, but she's going to follow the evidence to her conclusion. She's not going to take any kind of weird routes.
Well, Scully works entirely on a posteriori evidence. It's got to be there, she's got to be able to see it and prove it.
Yeah.
She's not going to do a Mulder astral projection. Prove it, Mulder, prove it.
Which, I can't believe I'm going to come back to this, but Shadows in season 1 is a really weird half of Shadows is such a weird episode.
We've mentioned Shadows quite a lot lately. It's funny that's the one that still keeps coming up.
It is, and it's because of how Shadows starts. It's after the opening credits, you've got Mulder and Scully brought in to look at the bodies, which are exhibiting the weird energy. And Scully is so excited and so down with the weird science in that one scene. And then it just evaporates for the rest of the episode, where he's saying, no, Mulder, ghosts aren't real. We must have faked his death. Because you were really into the weird energy and getting the fingerprints that Mulder did by wearing glasses, which he stopped doing.
I still think we're getting better with Scully, though. It's
Oh, yeah.
less the point-blank rule-following, no, that's not this, Mulder, we're going to find the rational explanation. We're more to the, all right, Mulder, let's rule out everything else and we'll come back to that.
Yeah. Or, well, I think it's...
Let's
you
follow Occam's razor here.
give me evidence this is happening and I'll consider it.
Mm.
Rappo being in a trance or a seizure isn't going to cut it.
But it's another case of Scully does not see, because Scully is doing her Scully best to first aid Rappo at the time when Mulder and Callahan are the ones being flung around by an invisible force.
Yeah, just like in Excelsis Dei.
With the flooding room.
Yeah. And I realise you need to have an upbeat-ish ending at the end of this episode, but it feels like Victor got away with murder really easily. I know the army is always presented as a Byzantine organisation whose rules you can't really understand if you're outside of it. But Scully watched him flat out murder someone.
But it wouldn't have been federally prosecuted, it would have been military prosecutions, and he's going to be fine.
Oh yeah, but the military could still, if they wanted to throw the book at Victor, call Scully as a witness.
I think you've possibly got that as more of an evidence of how veterans are treated, though, which is Rappo's entire argument, is that they've just disappeared him again. He doesn't get his burial in Arlington, he gets cremated and nobody mentions the fact that he was murdered. His killer gets away scot-free. It proves Rappo's point.
It does. I mean, I also actually took the Arlington thing as his family thinking he was a war hero, which I can understand. But Callahan's going to say, no. Well,
yeah,
no.
That's the obvious meaning we get, because they will not have broadcasted to the outside world that Rappo's been psychically killing people.
Can you imagine? This would be like the Roswell UFO report all over again, wouldn't it?
But at the same time, you've got that sad aspect of, where is Rappo's family? The only one who we see talking to him, like, socially is Roach over the course of the entire episode.
Yeah, well, and his support group, though, he actually rejects his support group because he's got... I understand he's worse off than everyone else, but he has literally no empathy for anyone else in that room.
Yeah, I think it was quite clear when you show around that group, though, he's the only quadruple amputee there.
Yeah.
There is... When Rappo says none of you can understand me, he's absolutely right.
He is correct, but it's one of these... That's not the point of the group, though. It's sort of, you are meant to share your experiences, though, and his experiences are worse than everyone else's. But he's not even trying to get with the program, is he?
I think you're looking at more failure of the system there, though, more than anything, though, because is this really all they're doing to help Rappo when Rappo is not coping?
Oh, though he did refuse prosthesis. They have offered him that.
But he's missing his limbs from, like, the hip. The prosthesis isn't going to help Rappo very much.
It's not, but apparently he's been turning down... They said he turned down all kind of help they've offered him. I know there's a limit to what they can actually do for him.
But Rappo clearly needs... It's not just physical help, he needs mental help as well, and all they're giving him is this circle of trust. It's not good.
No, it is not good. I think I'm going to have to take a page from Brooklyn Nine-Nine here. Cool motive, still murder.
It is cool motive, still murder, but at the same time, I think he's massively sympathetic.
Oh, he's sympathetic.
He's brutal, and you obviously can't sympathise with Rappo anywhere near to the degree you other would, because he does not just target the people he thinks he's responsible, he breaks them first. But it's the complexity of he wants people to feel as helpless as he is, and the only way he can attack these people is by destroying their lives, essentially, to get anything close.
Ooh, that's actually an interesting point, then. He's still got his family left.
Or does he?
Or does
his family that only appear after he's died.
Very true. But follow me on this one. If he wanted to genuinely inflict the same problem that he has experienced on other people, his astral projection could presumably just start lopping off limbs.
You think it could? I get the impression he's getting better control of it as well, because the early deaths are arsons.
Yes.
They're nowhere near the precision we see him singling out Callahan's family.
Yeah. But, I mean, that would presumably be... That's more fitting fate for these people he's ultimately holding responsible. I get... It's kind of like the Monster of the Week thing for him to go after the families in order for you to build up the animosity the audience would have towards him. Once you've got their sympathy, it's the whole, he's just murdered a small boy in a sandpit.
Well, that's why you can't sympathise with him, is anyone who would target Callahan's son and wife becomes immediately non-empathetic, even though he's just had so many bad things happen to him. You know, anyone, the audience can't put themselves in Rappo's position and understand how he feels. It's unthinkable.
Yes.
And you've got this sort of Kafka's metamorphosis feel of, the fact that his family only are mentioned after his death, the family who don't care or are maybe too horrified by what's happened to him that they don't even come and visit him.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have the support of his family or anything.
Which is weirdly one thing that Excelsis Dei does different then. Because we do actually have a family member and we have their reasons for why they haven't engaged with him properly.
Which is why I'm imagining that's kind of the reasons why Rappo's family aren't engaging with him either. It's a similar kind of, I can't stand to see you like this, thinking of your well-being, not theirs.
Yeah. I think we do have to word with Scully about suicide attempts, though. Because this thing with Roach in the bedsheet, is that remotely possible?
It's very reminiscent of one of the murders in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, where the kid is thrown in a lockup overnight and they find him with the entire bedsheet stuffed down his throat.
Yeah.
And everyone all calls for suicide. How?
I mean, I don't think I want to look it up, but it feels implausible to me, because normally, bedlam in kind of a prison situation, you'd expect someone to hang themselves, because that's how I understand the usual way it works.
I would also think that from a Suicide Watch perspective, is if you think someone might harm themselves, you're not going to give them sheets anyway.
Yeah, and I'm very dubious as to whether you can do this to yourself. I mean, I don't think you could actually do it without supernatural force anyway, because the human body is not designed to do that.
I knew somebody who went to stay in an institution, sadly, for a while once, and they did things like, even things like shoelaces, they weren't permitted because you could potentially damage yourself with them.
Yeah,
so this is why literally I would think that if anything was a risk to a person, it would not be in that room with him.
Yeah, so... but also, Scully, you're going to have to sort of rethink your thing. This is a hermetically sealed room. He's not being gassed. He's had a bedsheet shoved down his throat. Someone has to have done this, so I don't know how they could. But I also don't know how he could do it to himself.
I think it's one of those, again, Occam's razor things where you've got to come to the conclusion of he did do it to himself because there's nothing else that could have happened. There was a guard outside the door.
Yeah, and I think...
one of those human oddities where you think, wow, I never would have thought someone could do that. Because, of course, we as the audience know they couldn't.
Yes. Again, I think Oubliette's actually going to be... there's a whole load of these for Oubliette, which is an interesting situation to put her into.
We'll get there shortly.
We will get there shortly.
You do have an interesting build-up before you as the audience become aware of Rappo's power as well, where it is a straight ghost story. You have the things people see as there is an invisible force that's attacking these men's families and stopping them from killing themselves. Shadowy figures dressed like soldiers seen at the end of hallways, a garbled message that's only picked up by voicemails, which turns out to be backwards talk. This whispered repetitive phrase even from this unseen entity, because I think he always says the same or similar little sentence.
Yeah, your next killer or something, or your turn killer. The backwards messaging reminds me, though, and this could be a pop culture thing that we've seen it too many times, but when you first heard the tape, did you for a second not think it's backwards?
I've got to admit, with all the distortion on it, I didn't.
Okay.
Until you said it when I said... I think I paused the episode and asked you what it said, and you said, oh, it was backwards. I just thought I wasn't hearing it over the distortion.
No, I think... I'm not sure if that's familiarity or it's... the most obvious thing that it would be backwards, because you always do the wind the answer for message tape backwards to get the true thing.
We haven't really talked about any of the characters that Rappo targets, particularly Callahan. I think his trajectory through the episode is kind of interesting.
He is a very quick believer, all things considered.
As I think you would be in this situation.
True, although it's after his captain dies, isn't it? Where he suddenly actually becomes incredibly sympathetic to Mulder and Scully.
I think it's the captain's death is where you realise that there is something outwardly supernatural that you can't deny. Previously, Callahan has seen Rappo's shadowy figure and heard the messages and thought that they're pranks and just dismissed them.
I got the impression that he only saw the shadowy figure after the captain left his office that night. He'd been getting the phone calls for a while, but that was the first time he'd seen him.
But again, it's something you can play off as a trick of the mind.
Yeah.
When they find the captain in the pool with bruises around her neck showing she's been strangled, and then the camera evidence and the witnesses say there was no one else in there, that's when he starts to entertain the supernatural because there's no other explanation for him.
Yeah, it's then an interesting contrast to Scully, who's not going to let that get in the way.
But I think Callahan's most interesting scene is towards the end when he finally does have an opportunity to kill Rappo and Rappo wants it. Is he approaches Rappo in bed with the gun and Rappo kind of goads him into shooting him and Callahan just unloads the gun into the wall and infers the fact that he's not going to kill him because him just existing like that is worse torture.
You got to wonder then what would have happened if he hadn't actually shot him.
That would have just been it. That was Rappo's goal, is essentially assisted suicide because he can't end his own tragic and miserable existence.
True, although he can actually project.
But he's still... That's not what he wants.
He wants to be killed by another person.
Well, he says it pretty much in that scene. I think that's what Rappo's after. Rappo is so self-destructive and nihilistic, is he's getting revenge on all these people, but really he's the one who wants to die, but he's just not in a position where he can do so.
Indeed, but that's what I mean about the astral projection thing, is though he could presumably astral project, take himself up to the top of the hospital and throw himself off.
It doesn't seem to have that degree of control, though. It's not prolonged. When we see it in the fog, it can only strike very briefly and then it disapparates and strikes again.
True.
I don't think you could keep it up necessarily for long enough while he's unconscious to carry a man all the way to the roof of the hospital.
That's a fair point. I mean, presumably that's something he could actually have worked up to, I suppose. I mean, you do get it. That does...
You've probably got that idea as well of the fact that you can't choke yourself, is that as soon as he wakes up, and he would if something was choking him, he'd lose the astral projection.
Although, weirdly, that didn't seem to be how, when Victor was doing it, is it seemed to be after he died, so presumably he'd have snapped back to his body quicker than that. I mean, there is a whole thing about how people treat euthanasia, and still treat euthanasia to this day, of the fact that Rappo hasn't been... that to offer Rappo that as an option is unthinkable to people.
I don't think you'd even consider it for someone like Rappo, because you like to have the positive of, oh, he's still got his whole life in front of him. It's not like he's got a terminal disease or something.
Yeah, but but you make that, it's that weird thing though where your pets, the concept of a quality of life is the factor that comes into euthanizing your pets, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I think you'd argue if a pet was in Rappo's position, you'd be in the talks about whether or not to put it to sleep. Is it suffering? Yeah,
but in our real world, certainly in this country and I think in the States, that line of thinking is never going to be held. It'd be just basically taboo to even suggest it, isn't it?
It's quite sad in a way when you think of it, is Rappo has no quality of life. He is so depressed, and again, I will note the fact that the institution has failed him, when all the mental health support we see offered to him is sit in this circle and talk about your experiences.
It's true.
This is Rappo's life now, lying in a hospital bed, and Rappo quite rightly wants out. Which is part of the darkness of this episode and why it sticks with you. I think, possibly of all of the X-Files villains we've seen so far, Rappo is one of the most interesting. There's so much to him as a character that I feel you've kind of scratched the surface of Rappo in a 45-minute episode.
We'll move along to Oubliette. Oubliette, directed by Kim Manners, written by Charles Grant Craig, which I think is his first episode, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Possibly his last.
I think it's his only one, yeah.
Originally broadcast on the 17th of November 1995. Guest stars. It's hard to miss in geek circles, but dual state as Amy Jacobs, who is 13 playing a 15-year-old, I think.
That's right, yeah.
She's been in, obviously, most famously, she was Kaylee in Firefly and Serenity, but she was also in a film called The Pact, which we watched under recommendation and didn't enjoy it much.
Yeah.
But she was also in Wonder Falls, the other Brian Fuller series.
It was a good series.
That was a good series. Other actress of note would be Tracy Ellis as Lucy Householder, who will recur again in the X-Files in Audrey Pauly, all the way in season 9. I think it's season 9, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right.
But she's also been on Star Trek Voyager. And she's been in a film with Jack Black, it turns out.
Oh.
You want to guess which one?
No, go on.
Neverending Story Part 3.
Oh,
That's not a good one.
it was entertaining.
Have you seen that one?
Yes, I have.
Wow, I give up to 2.
I think they're called the Nasties or something like that.
Oh,
He's the
yeah.
villain in it.
Yeah. Weird note for everyone about Neverending Story 3, Neverending Story films is if you've only ever seen the films and never read the book, you might go with the first one's fine and then everything after that is kind of rubbish. But Neverending Story Part 2, bizarrely, is the second half of the actual book.
Oh, okay.
And that was such a weird thing to find when reading it, because you get into a halfway point and you get to the film conclusion and go, wait, what? What's the rest of the book? Oh my god, it's Neverending Story Part 2! It's better as a book. Anyway, would you like to give us a synopsis of Oubliette?
Sure. The episode this time takes place in Seattle and opens at a class photo. We see 15-year-old Amy Jacobs, who is having a photograph taken while being watched in a slightly creepy way by the photography assistant, who's called Carl Wade. We see in the days that follows, Carl Wade becomes obsessed with her, even taking her school photos and cutting them out to superimpose them with photos of himself. Eventually his obsession becomes so great that he breaks into her house at night and kidnaps her in full view of her younger sister who's sleeping in the next bed. At exactly the same time, across town, a fast food worker called Lucy Householder collapses after having a massive nosebleed. It's noted that as she collapsed, she is muttering the same things that Carl is saying to Amy as he kidnaps her, which is, nobody's gonna spoil us. Mulder joins the investigation to investigate the disappearance. He's drawn into it, of course, because of Samantha, his younger sister, who, as we've seen previously, was kidnapped in a similar situation. The investigation does lead Mulder to Lucy, and he learns that she too was taken from her bedroom at the age of 8, some 22 years earlier. She was held in a basement for 5 years before she escaped, leaving her with developmental problems and other anxiety issues. Scully is also interested in Lucy, however, she believes that she's actually connected to Amy's disappearance because she's got a massively long criminal record and has a history of having a relationship with a man who was also violent to children. Scully also notes the fact that 2 different blood types were found on Lucy's uniform. One was her own O positive, the other was B positive, which is Amy's blood type. Scully wants to look into this further to see if it actually does have a DNA match with Amy's blood. Mulder will not entertain this. He believes that Lucy is entirely innocent. While staying at her room in a halfway house, Lucy takes ill. She's suddenly cast into a fever-like delirium, scratches appear on her face, and she finds that she can't see. We see in the cut that this is identical injuries to what Amy has sustained in the kidnapping, and she's being kept in a darkened basement of Wade's cabin, hence the reason why Lucy currently believes she's blind. It becomes readily apparent that the two are developing some kind of inexplicable psychic link, so that everything that happens to Amy physically is also felt by Lucy. Mulder quickly realises this and starts convincing Lucy to try and help them find Amy, but she's far too afraid. She just wants to forget what happens to her, and she's just terrified and doesn't understand why this is happening to her. Scully also makes Mulder aware of a new lead they have in the case. They have linked back to the photography session at the school because Amy's photos have not arrived home. They've learnt that Wade was fired the following day under weird circumstances. Scully is also suspicious that Wade might be responsible because he's been institutionalized in the past for bipolar disorder. Mulder is still adamant that Lucy is not involved in any way. However, when he shows her a photo of Wade, he sees that she recognizes him and realizes that he was also her kidnapper years before. Scully finally gets the blood typing back and discovers that she was absolutely correct. The blood on Lucy's uniform is an exact match for Amy's. Now she is wanted in connection, believing that she is Wade's accomplice. However, Lucy absolutely scarpers and disappears, leading to some friction between Eubanks, the agent in charge of this case, and Mulder, because he believes that Mulder has let one of the kidnappers get away. The team very quickly gets another tip-off for Wade's location. It comes from a truck driver who previously tried to help Wade change a flat tire, only to be aggressively chased away from him. The location, he tells them, is the woods near Easton in Washington, which was where Lucy was found when she escaped years previously. They quickly find Wade's cabin in the woods, using details from a photo development lab in town which he's been frequenting with the photos that he's taken of Amy. When they arrive at the cabin, Wade and Amy are nowhere to be found. However, Mulder investigates the basement room and finds Lucy down there, very disorientated and with no idea of how she came to be there. Lucy is arrested and Mulder takes her out to the car. However, as he sits her in there, she starts feeling cold and wet and choking. Mulder deduces that this is because of her connection with Amy, and that means that Amy must be currently being dragged through the local river. It's in the opposite direction to where they think Wade's fled, but Mulder realises that Wade knows the woods and must have doubled back. Mulder and Scully rush to find her and find that Wade, who has lost control of the situation and realise that they're going to take Amy from him, is trying to drown her. Mulder shoots Wade, presumably dead, while he and Scully then attempt to perform CPR on Amy. We see, cutting between Amy and the car, that Lucy has also begun to drown, even though she's nowhere near water, and the CPR is affecting both of them. Due to the connection shared, the CPR does not work on Amy, it instead resuscitates Lucy in the car as Amy dies on the riverbank. Mulder is forced to stop CPR as Scully points out that he's lost her. Suddenly and unexpectedly, the process reverses. Amy recovers while Lucy dies. Mulder is overwhelmed by the sacrifice of Lucy's, and especially the fact that he could not save her, and breaks down in tears over her body. Scully points out that he was always part of the connection they shared, because even though it was Amy and Lucy that were connected in some way she couldn't explain, they never would have saved Amy without Mulder's help. Mulder later realises that Lucy probably didn't just do it to save Amy, that Lucy has been traumatised and struggled for years because of what Wade did to her, and this was finally the only way that she could escape him and forget.
Thank you. Do you want to start with the controversy?
Yes. This episode, and this is the reasoning for the aging up of Amy. As we previously noted, Amy, as actor Jill State, was 13 at the time this was filmed, but using makeup and other effects, they've aged her up to look like she's an older teen. I think she's supposed to be about 15 in the episode. That is because 2 years prior to this, there was another very similar incident that was very high profile in America called the Polly Klaas kidnapping. Sorry about the details of this, just in advance again if they're a bit upsetting. But it was on October the 1st, 1993. Polly Klaas was kidnapped from her home during a slumber party, and an inebriated man burst into their house, blindfolded the girls' presents and told them it was just going to be a robbery, but while they were all blindfolded, took Polly away. Essentially, he wound up driving his car into a ditch, and frightened that he was going to be caught when he realised deputies were on the way, he freaked out, murdered the girl and hid her in the woods, which led to a massive manhunt until eventually they managed to find some of the girl's belongings into the wood, link it back to him, at which point he did confess and never showed a shred of remorse for what he did, but did lead them to find where Polly's body was. So it's a lot worse than Oubliette in the sense that poor Polly Klaas did not survive her ordeal. But it caused a lot of worry when this episode was aired, just for the similarity of snatching the girl from the room, the car accident, the killer who, when backed into a corner, will murder the girl he's taken. You know, it was just all too similar for censors. With, I guess, enough small differences just to kind of slightly distance it from what happened.
Yeah, just about. I think Scully's interesting in this episode, although there's a bit of backsliding on Scully, and she's also painted in a sympathetic but slightly villainous light.
I thought it was an interesting stance to take because it's another, essentially, a Samantha episode, but Scully has also been abducted before and shows remarkably little sympathy. She doesn't really empathise with the situation at all.
Again, we're harking back to that weird inconsistency in her character of autopsies, ritual sacrifice, dead bodies in general are fine, but grave desecration is beyond the pale. But in this one, she's definitely presented it as looking at the evidence and coming to the wrong conclusion, even though from all the rational perspectives, Scully is 100% correct all the way down.
Yeah, I think it's another Mulder being an absolute maniac deduction to take from this. Because if we look at the facts as they are laid out from Scully's perspective, at the same time the kidnapper takes a girl from her house, she's this woman who's been mumbling nonsense, although there's no explanation of how the blood came to be there. has 2 different bloods on her shirt, one belonging to the victim. So, and also has this past potential connection to him in the fact that she was a kidnapped victim who was kidnapped by the same person. You've got Scully's chain of thought here is, yes, she's absolutely connected. There is no other way to read this. I can't explain how the blood got on her shirt, but the fact it's there is the evidence.
Yeah, there's also a certain element of certain police horror stories of they have evidence against someone. They're not worried about the context of that. It's just that we can link these two together. That's enough to convince a jury we can then arrest. Which seems to be... That's not so much Scully's mindset, but that's the other agent's guy, Eubanks. That's his perspective, is certainly, we don't need to understand it, we just need to pin this crime on someone. If we can't get the actual killer to justice, Lucy will do.
I think it's because sometimes there's a fear... You even saw it in the Polyclass cases. The deputies that arrived on the scene realised there was something sus about this guy, but couldn't find a reason to detain him, so they had to let him go.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, how different things could be if you just found a reason to detain him.
Yeah, at the same time, though, you get into that whole cop's gut feelings are that's really shady to be operating on.
It is a shady area. It's just unfortunate that there are these instances where it could have saved a life.
It's true, but it's also, you get into that whole, is it better to let 10 guilty men walk free or kill one innocent man kind of thing, isn't it?
Mm.
The hypotheticals.
It's a hard hypothetical because it depends on your closeness to the case as well. I'm sure Amy's mother in this would have said, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but that's no way to operate a civilized society.
Mm.
But Scully has a major moment of backsliding which feels slightly out of character. Which is the whole, she happily sides with Eubanks, like the 3/4 mark.
Yeah.
When they're gonna just try and pin everything on Lucy, and it's Scully, you're not meant to do this anymore.
I think it's the scene where you see Scully getting out of the car and marching into the halfway house with them. It's Scully's joined the Blackcoats this time.
Yeah, and Scully, you've refused to do this a few times this season, and you shouldn't be doing it now. This is way too late for you to be operating like this still.
Yeah, it's kind of like how Scully was back maybe midway through the first season.
Conduit, she just threw the family under the bus because she was asked to.
Back when Scully would kowtow, but at the same time, the evidence is there and Mulder is completely compromised. Mulder, for every time in this episode, he says this has nothing to do with Samantha.
Oh,
and
it is.
100% is.
It is. I mean, I would also argue, though, this episode shouldn't happen past Colony. Given Mulder's been given a explicit assurance that Samantha is alive, this feels like an alternate explanation of what happened to her.
Mm.
An alternate possibility that he doesn't seriously entertain, but is just for this week.
It could also be feeding into his trauma, though, because there's a bit early on where he speaks to Amy's mother and she just kind of rebuffs him and says, you can't know how I feel. But of course he does. As Mulder's been through this, it was deeply traumatic and it shaped his life.
Yeah, I think at some point we'll have to have words of how Samantha's abduction has turned Mulder into a raving lunatic. That's for later. I get they can't really do it, and there's no graceful way to do it. It is one of these things of why the connection forms is... Yeah, we have no idea why this is happening, why this supernatural event has occurred in this one.
The thing that caught me interesting about it is I really dislike the fact, and to be fair, it's not exactly the same in the book. There is a book of this one, I should mention that. It's called Empathy. But it's the fact that Scully kind of pins and really oversimplifies Carl in a way by saying, oh yeah, he's bipolar.
Yeah, I thought it was bipolar? Really? You get institutionalized for bipolar?
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure you can be. It can be incredibly severe and absolutely life-threatening.
Okay.
But at the same time, lots of people have bipolar disorder. They take their medication. They can integrate happily with society. It doesn't turn you into a stalker, psychopath, killer, kidnapper.
Yes. You reminded me weirdly of, and I can't remember what series it's associated with, but there's a science fiction magazine called Starlog. I don't think it exists anymore, but this was an American one. And someone wrote in once about an example of an albino villain in something. And they also suffered from albinism, and they were just so annoyed that basically you see albinism in context of villains. You rarely see it in any other context.
I guess because you're going for this person looks different and that's creepy sort of aspect.
The only possible examples I've got are The Evil Within, and where Leslie is very ambiguous what he's doing all the way through that game, and Neon Genesis Evangelion, where you can't really call Rei or Karu villains per se, but they're probably not on the good side either, given what they end up doing.
I'd probably go for the best example I can think, and it's literary, is Elric of Millenborn. It's Michael Moorcock's fantasy book series. He's more of an anti-hero, but Prince Elric is the one that always pops to mind when I try and think of a character with albinism who is a hero.
Okay. Because I know this came out when the first Wonder Woman was in cinemas, was, of course, the villainous doctor has a facial scarring.
Yeah.
It is a common Hollywood and TV trope that if you are normally meant to be attractive on screen and you've got a scar, you're going to be a villain. I think you get this in, even Legend of Korra and Avatar: Last Airbender do it to a point. Dozuku then kind of flips the script on that.
Yeah, it's, I guess, one of those tropes that you can never move away from, but at the same time, I also kind of didn't think Carl was that interesting compared to, the last few episodes we've had where we've had Rappo and we've had, Virgil and Canto. You've got some kind of memorable, interesting villains. Carl has kind of below average intelligence, and our very ham-handed explanation is that he has a bipolar disorder for his motivation.
Yeah, and it was also how he hasn't been caught feels so unlikely given how badly he reacts.
That's part of my argument that I got off topic there for a minute, but with regards to the empathy, Lucy's connection with Amy, are we supposed to believe that even though he's kind of an escalating kidnapper, that he apparently has just laid low for 17 years and done nothing in that time?
That's the implication. I mean, I think you might have actually had a stronger case if you'd not tried to claim that Carl was the same kidnapper both times.
Or if we say he's been institutionalized, if you indicate the fact he's been institutionalized for 17 years or something. Yeah.
Or, I don't know, I think having him be the culprit in both cases does weird things to this episode. Because, as you said, that pause in the middle is just... what happened?
Yeah, why was he suddenly apparently not being a stalker kidnapper in that time? Yeah,
and I think the other problem with that is it's the whole... he's a photographer... It's applied to photographer's assistant. We're gonna suppose this is his first high school photo gig and that he's just gone well off the deep end this one time because of dual state.
The book, actually, why I brought up empathy, makes Carl a bit more interesting, I guess. You have more into his head and more of Scully analysing what's wrong with him. So, for a start, it's not he does it because he's got bipolar disorder. They reckon that people might have looked the fact that he has more serious issues because they've focused too much on his bipolar disorder. So there is an evidence that more's at play with his psyche. But also, I think it's Scully calls him a butterfly collector, which I think is a really interesting way to explain the fact of he doesn't actually molest or anything the people he takes, which for kudos for the X-Files for not going into that. But it's like the kid who catches a butterfly in the jar, that if he can't control something, he'll kill it. But he likes having the pretty thing in the jar he can just look at.
Yeah. And take photos of. I think, I suppose he might not be getting his pictures developed in town. I was going to say, though, that getting his pictures developed in town feels awfully risky, given the people running the photos who are going to say, why do you have 24 pictures of a terrified girl in the basement?
Again, you don't see it in the episode, I don't think, but in the book, he specifically is going out to buy paper, so I assumed he's got a dark room in the house and he's developing it.
Well, weirdly enough, and where it's actually just getting complicated then is, he was using the Oubliette, the downstairs basement, as his darkroom in the opening sting.
Mm.
And that's where she is. So...
he must have converted a bathroom upstairs?
Maybe. You do want to look at this guy and say, if just, 5 years later, and you'd be using Photoshop for these creepy colours where you can't even get the scales of the people right.
It says in the book that he cuts them out and then rephotographs it so he gets an authentic looking photograph of them together.
Okay, but it's still either she's miles behind him or he's towering over us like 800 times their size.
So it's the interesting about the book is there is a lot more in Carl's head.
Yeah.
So you get his chain of thought a lot and his motivation, which I guess isn't necessary in the episode, but it makes it a bit more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've written it deliberately so basically you can read as much or as little into his ultimate goals as you want. Given Lucy does say he won't touch her yet kind of things.
He won't touch her until he thinks she's going to be taken away, essentially.
Yeah, there's sort of, you can read all kinds of whatever uncomfortable things you want to into that sentence.
He's got the almost childlike obsession. He very rarely speaks to people in the episode, but I think the longest chain he gets is after a bit about halfway through where Amy tries to escape and he drags her back. And he's saying things like, I take care of you, don't I? We're happy, we're together. These epithets, because in his head, he believes that they're a happy couple and she should be grateful to him and things like that.
No.
He's not quite the menace of Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, which is clearly what this episode is based on.
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs continues to cast a very long shadow over the X-Files.
But particularly with the cabin in the woods and keeping them in an oubliette.
Oh, yeah. Just no lotion on the skin kind of thing and the skin suits.
Did you know there's no word in the English language for the opening of an oubliette? That's one of the things I discovered from this episode.
What is the word for the opening of an oubliette?
An angstlock.
Angstlock.
It's a really good word, but apparently it's often translated as trapdoor in English because we have no equivalent. But, traditionally they're covered by, like, a lattice.
Yeah. You can see the argument. I mean, the weird thing ultimately is she's not in an oubliette, she's just in the basement. But it's a good title.
It does have an oubliette opening, though. You see it's a ladder that goes down into it.
Yeah, but it's not a mesh, it's like it is just a trapdoor.
It is just a trapdoor in his floor, yeah.
But we haven't really touched on Lucy, who is interesting because she's basically set up like some certain real world cases where the victim isn't believed purely because of her past history. Because she's dabbled in prostitutes, drugs, lots of other illegal stuff.
Has a horrible ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, and they do it in the episode, to be fair, and it's basically that's all used as evidence against her, even though it has nothing actually to do with the current circumstances.
I think there's an interesting line in the episode where Mulder says, it's amazing she's come so far, and Scully just kind of says, really, Mulder? It's the difference between where they're putting that kind of yardstick.
Yeah.
Is in Mulder's eyes, it's amazing that she's done anything with her life at all, and Scully thinking, well, the things she's done aren't very impressive.
Yeah. And I don't want to say either of them are basically out of character, but it doesn't feel... Mulder's sentiments in this episode feel too strong, too fast, basically, for what he's going through. I know she's a substitute Samantha, but he latches onto her in seconds. There is almost no pause before he goes full bore. You're my replacement Samantha for the week.
I think we can say that it's Mulder and Scully's what gets to them is very clearly different. You keep joking about Scully being upset by the desecration of graves, but think the start of Excelsis Dei where they have the woman who's been raped by something and Mulder is so dismissive of it, but it upsets Scully quite a lot.
Yeah.
This is kind of the reversal of that, where you've got Scully is maybe a little too dismissive of Lucy Householder, whereas Mulder just gets right in there.
Yeah, and it's again... I think Excelsis Dei is another good comparison. It's just because that one we noted they felt like they were basically flipped from their normal perspectives, and this one it doesn't feel like they're flipped, but it feels like they've been accelerated into they're too far down both of their arcs for this episode than they should be. Mulder should take a lot longer to get to his empathetic stage, and Scully should be more open before she's decided to sort of veer into hard science and isn't coming back out of it again. I don't know, it's almost like it should have been a longer episode or a two-parter or something, though I think you struggle to stretch this to 2 parts. It's just Mulder needs more time to get to where he's going.
I think you've got Mulder's naivety played to the nth degree as well.
Yeah,
it's you're exactly right. It's too quick, and because of that, it's like Mulder just dismisses everything so quickly and hinges on it. We've seen Mulder be quite skeptical before. Luther Lee Boggs being the most obvious one, where Mulder does not latch onto the supernatural option. But in this one, it almost feels too naive of him, of a man who is a trained psychological profiler.
Exactly what I was going to say. This is not how you should be behaving, Mulder. You should be a lot more detached. And we know you're the people person, although you are also the people person who will use someone and toss them under the bus if they give them what you want, or they don't give you what you want. He's deifying Lucy, I think, is the problem. But again, he's not had a build up to get to that deification. He hits it too fast.
I don't think he's naturally sympathetic with Lucy as well. Seen by the fact of her suicide takes him by surprise at the end.
Yeah.
He's putting too much pressure on Lucy, despite Lucy's obvious psychological problems, long-term psychological problems from her years of incarceration. He puts so much pressure on her to find Amy, and in the end, Lucy saves Amy, like Mulder wants her to, but Mulder didn't realise the human cost of this.
Yeah, and that at least is that's very much in keeping, and this is kind of one of the extreme. He's not got to this extreme previously, but he's now hit a point where he's got what he wanted, but it has actually killed someone in the process.
It almost harks back to what Cancer Man says back in F. Emasculata. It's the idea that, is it Mulder going to be able to get this truth, and what would the human cost of doing it be?
Yes, and I think we definitely discussed in F. Emasculata with the other problem with it of Mulder can have the truth, but it will do him no good at all. Well, he will know he's got the truth, but he's not going to be able to do anything with it. It's a shiny bauble he's caught hold of.
But at the same time, it is getting what you want as important as losing other things.
Yeah, so it's one of those things of Scully is also a bit too willing to throw. Well, I understand why Scully is ready to pin everything on Lucy because the chain of evidence makes perfect sense. But again, she's ignoring her experiences for 2.5 years now, which should then. She might not be able to explain it, but be open to the whole something weird has happened.
There is also the one obvious blip, which is what Mulder hinges on, perhaps a little too much, is the fact that Lucy cannot possibly have been present at the time of the kidnapping. And there are witnesses to testify this.
Yes.
So you do have that thing of, well, how did the blood get on her? And that's the problem.
Yes. And I think it's very hard not to sympathise with Scully's perspective of, I can't explain how it got there. What you are suggesting makes absolutely no sense. Because if she was bleeding Amy's blood, the human body doesn't... Actually, what blood type... No, she's O, isn't she? She can actually do this.
Lucy was O positive. Amy was B+.
Which way around was it?
Which way around's what?
The universal donor and the universal recipient. Would this have killed her if it happened?
The universal recipient, I believe, is AB+. The universal donor is O negative.
Okay.
So those two blood types have nothing in common whatsoever.
But also means that you wouldn't have both of them in your veins at the same time because that body is going to reject that.
No, it's not possible. Yeah. You can't have those two.
That's what I mean, though. So from Scully's perspective, she can't have blood the blood because it would have killed her before she got to that point.
Your initial argument could have been, well, it just could have been some other random B positive person's blood. Yeah. But the DNA match is irrefutable.
It throws it all out. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely a bizarre, unexplainable event, but nothing else about it sort of works. And weirdly, I think we're going to get into something similar to this with I Want to Believe much further down the line for weird things to discredit victims, ultimately, but that's for a few years hence.
Quite.
It's hard not to sympathise with Scully despite the fact we are meant to usually be on Mulder's side, but it's hard to empathise with Mulder. He's doing a great job of selling this. But personally, you just latched onto this woman with no preamble, and you're just gonna not let her live her life because she might be able to save this other girl. And yes, everyone's meant to be altruistic and help each other, but you're trying to drag her back to the most traumatic incident of her life that she's not entirely sure how she escaped from. She couldn't talk for 2 years after being kept in the dark for 5, was it?
Said she was kept in the dark for 5 years, which left her with extreme photosensitivity and speech delays because she was rarely spoken to in that time.
Yeah, and leave the poor woman alone. Yes, she might be able to help Amy, but don't drag her back into this cesspit.
You've got to imagine what form Skinner is now having to sign off in the office for Mulder leading this woman to her death, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, we could get to the death. I mean, I possibly was a bit too quick to assign this to Scully's Killed Another One. On the other hand, though, and again, it's a whole TV production, they don't bother the CPR for long, do they?
I think your criticism here is there's no way they could have kept up 20 minutes of CPR in
I
this
know on
episode.
screen, but
You had to do, but
it feels very brief.
it feels short. It's a lousy attempt at CPR as well. If we're going for the realistic view in this,
Yeah.
I know CPR is never portrayed correctly because CPR is utterly traumatic when you do it correctly.
But it feels like they do like 3 breaths and Scully saying, "No, she's dead."
Oh, I think the one that gets me is when Scully is calling time. Just Mulder gently pressing down on her chest in the background. It's like, well, that's going to do nothing.
Yeah.
For the record, you're aiming at pushing down on the chest so hard and so quickly that you should be pressing down. I think it's something like 5 centimeters into the chest, which is why ribs break if you're doing it correctly. Which is why you never see it right on screen as well. But I will buy it for the sake of the episode. Is we've done the effort, and we've done the effort of showing the CPR cycle where they take it in turns as well. So this is the best CPR we've probably seen on the X-Files to date. It's not, as you put it before the episode, of Scully has killed another one.
No, but it's perilously closer than you'd like it to be that Scully has straight up murdered another person. But you also didn't let her off for Miracle Man, where she took that girl's pulse and said she's dead.
She didn't even attempt CPR in that one.
We're not impressed by Scully's medical training.
My favourite one to date, I should note, is Still Beyond the Sea, where Mulder gets shot and she puts a coat over him.
We did actually that's the other one, isn't it? So Amy has revived on the riverbank. It's going to be night soon. We have to get her somewhere warm. None of you bastards are going to take off your coats, are you?
There's at least 3 men, plus Mulder stood around there wearing big trench coats.
Mulder's raced off by that point.
Oh, Mulder's raced off. Right, I'll give it. There's at least 3 men wearing trench coats. And a girl shivering, soaking wet, saying, "I'm so cold." And nobody puts a coat on her.
Absolute jerks, a lot of them.
So, as you say, empathy is dead in this episode, I think.
Oh, yeah. We also have Gormless Twit, who's been left looking after Lucy while she drowns in the backseat of a car.
To be fair, what would you do?
I don't know either. But Scully is...
I must admit, I might have attempted CPR, but...
But when Mulder points out to Scully at the end, I mean, there's also the other hilarious comment is, they must have dragged Amy through the woods and she didn't have a scratch on her. You mean aside from the 3 gouges in her cheek, the one on her forehead, the other ones that have been transferred between her and Lucy, all those scratches. But then it was a case of they found Lucy with 5 gallons of river water in her lungs. And Scully's just going, I can't explain it either, Mulder. Scully, this is kind of supernatural. This is basically impossible unless you think the guy watching Lucy lied and she actually ran off to the river, drowned herself and crawled back to the car.
Or, the guy watching is the killer and he's just been pouring river water into her lungs.
Exactly. It's just... Scully, this is weird. She'll be reacting to 5 gallons in her lungs.
For a medical oddity, you'd think that Scully would be interested as well, being a pathologist.
I mean, this reminds me of an episode of Monk, of all things. Because there's an episode of Monk where they start with this person went on a parachute jump. When he landed, he was dead, and they discovered he was drowned.
Okay.
Somehow drowned that time. And I think early on, someone actually suggests that the person doing the autopsy has falsified the results. And it turns out he did. So basically, this guy just poured water into the corpse's lungs after the fact and claimed that he'd drowned.
So it's not even like we've gone for some clever secondary drowning or something.
No, yeah, so it literally faked the evidence. But it's really odd that Scully isn't at all interested in how that happened, because that's absolutely implausible and
I think
impossible.
we need a medical investigation of this.
Yeah.
But...
Say, okay, so Scully, you're not buying the blood on her shirt. That's weird. It should have been impossible. This is even more impossible. This is even her breathing. She was like a mile from the river. Please, Scully, give us something.
Do you know, though, I was reading the reviews of this from the time this episode first aired, and this has been one of the most unanimously better rated episodes so far. People loved this one when it came out.
Okay.
People were giving it, like, B+A ratings, which...
Feel too high?
Well, often you find with X-Files is there'll always at least be one U in the crowd. So you'll have all of the A ratings and then just one guy say, no, it's rubbish, I don't like it. But this one, they were unanimously very high.
Okay, I'm not going to say it's rubbish. I'm just going to say I think an A rating is
like,
a bit too
for
much.
example, The Walk last time, that got kind of middling ratings, but this one was very positive.
Okay.
I've got to admit, I like the idea of this episode more than the execution. It's in part because I don't find the villain very interesting in this episode.
No.
And I think it's also possibly the fact that we've had a couple of really strong villains this season. And then Carl, and he's just a bit ordinary.
ordinary, and we don't understand how he doesn't get caught.
But I do really like the idea of having a previous victim with a kind of psychic connection to the current victim. It's a nice idea.
It's a nice idea. It's just, it kind of feels almost like complaining about Groundhog Day, but it's the whole, you kind of wonder why it's happened. Like, if it was something about Carl himself or something about Lucy.
I think my biggest problem, as I mentioned earlier, is the gap. Is
Yeah.
I think you need a clearer reason why there's a gap, or if there isn't supposed to be a gap, if Carl has been continuously kidnapping people through this time, why now? Why Amy?
Yeah. I think the episode is structured in such a way that you can read that he was incarcerated for that entire time span.
When Scully said he was institutionalized.
Yeah.
It's a long time for someone to be institutionalized and them not to realize he's a psychopath, though.
Yeah, and to give him a job as a photographer's assistant who takes high school photos. Yeah.
Is really, in 17 years of institutionalization, would they not have noticed that this is a bit more than a bipolar disorder?
Yeah. For the record, though, I think it's a fine episode. I'm just not gonna say it's a truly great episode.
I'm gonna say middling.
Yeah.
It's not on the level of the ones I've really objected to, like Excelsis Dei.
No. But then it's, again, I feel they're too constrained by 45 minutes. If you had an extra 15 minutes or something, then that smooths out Mulder's progression and smooths out Scully's progression. I would give it a higher rating because it's just he's moving too fast and he's leaping to a conclusion based on very, very flimsy stuff. Because sometimes he's got a good case for what he believes, but this one is he's conjectured an awful lot from a person collapsing on the other side of town at the same moment, saying the same thing. And yes, that's in the 14 times. This would be a spooky coincidence, wouldn't it?
Yeah, true.
And in the X-Files, yeah, okay, Mulder, you are correct, but you shouldn't be correct.
Also, I didn't mention his catchphrase previously of nobody's going to spoil us, because I only realised this viewing on reading the book, in fact, what it actually means. Because it's such a weird thing for him to keep saying nobody's going to spoil us. But what he's getting at is, I will not allow anyone to spoil our relationship. Which is why, when he says it the final time, I can't remember if he does in the episode, but certainly in the book, is just before he drowns her. He says it right in her face, and she has the dawning realization then that he's even considering her in that he won't even allow her to spoil the relationship. So it's the point when he's dragging her away and she says, I can't walk any further. He's realised that's it and just drowns her.
It's a very, very horrible person.
Yeah.
A terrible villain.
Yeah, just a nasty villain with no redeemable features, which, again, coming after Rappo, where Rappo's got a strong motive. It's just, I think he's a bit weak. I expect better of the X-Files by this point.
I'm wondering, I'm thinking out loud here. Is he kind of, and he shouldn't be in this situation, but he kind of is he basically Donnie Faster a few steps prior to where we wound up? Is this kind of like one of the escalation things Donnie Faster might have done on his route to a death fetishization?
But Donnie Faster had a clear escalation because he started off desecrating corpses and then started making his own corpses.
Oh, I know, but I mean, could this be an even earlier stage though? Because could you expect Carl to wind up in that kind of situation if, living people are going to keep on rebelling against him?
I think he's more of the stalker archetype, because the stalker is the idea of, originally he's satisfied by just looking, and eventually just looking is not enough and he has to take it for himself. You've got more of the stalker escalation.
Yeah, although, again, I think that the timing kind of inhibits that because he goes from just looking to having to possess in a day?
I meant more on the long haul of maybe when you're saying he's you said earlier about he's been a photography assistant. Why has he just targeted her now? Is maybe he was content just superimposing his photos for a while, and this is phase 2.
I suppose so. I mean,
but again, you've got that. It's the gap that makes it weird. Is he's kidnapped a girl before and held her for 5 years?
Yeah, and also the fact that he doesn't have the sense of when all the other school pictures were sent out. Guess who was missing? Because you don't think that's going to draw attention right back to you so quickly.
I don't think we've had both Virgil Incanto and Donnie Faster were both quite high functioning.
Yeah,
I don't think Carl's bright.
No, but then it's still how he got away with it.
He's completely reactionary, and he really only has got away with it because he lives in a really remote area where no one's seeing him.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing that occurred to me then is Zodiac as a counter example of someone who should not have got away with as cleanly as he did.
There are all the weirdnesses of where Zodiac was almost caught, though,
Yeah,
which you don't really have with Carl. The closest anyone gets to catching him is that truck driver.
yeah, and it's still the whole his reaction then was just sort of this is the most serial killer-esque behavior you get in a random encounter.
It's very similar to the scene in Ascension, where the cop stops when Scully's in the boot.
Yeah, just without that, presumably Amy's unconscious at this point in time.
Yeah. But also the fact it didn't end as badly because Dwayne Barry kills the cop that stops them, whereas the truck driver's just chased off with a tire iron.
Yeah. It kind of felt for a while like he was going to be just a one-scene thing. It was actually kind of surprised when he brought back in at the end. Oh yeah, I saw that guy. Whoa!
I think it's just the forced stoppage is just another one of those uncomfortable similarities with the polyclass case as well.
Yeah.
Where it's the whole, if it was just a girl is kidnapped from her room, I could buy that maybe they did it in ignorance. There are just a couple of glaring similarities like that where it's like, oh yeah, that is a bit uncomfortably close.
I think I thought it's a weird one where you could actually make the argument they haven't been able to resist lifting from that case, but they didn't want to be as blunt. I'm thinking too in terms of siblings in America, certainly, most other countries as well. Amy's meant to be 15. You could probably excuse this if she was 12, 13 maybe at the latest, but 15. She's not going to share a room with her sister.
Her sister looks very young, maybe
Yeah.
5 years old.
Yeah, so that's not... Teenagers don't want that situation. They want privacy at that stage of their life.
I guess it looks like they have a fairly big house
It does. It doesn't look like it's a small... That doesn't look like they're a poor family or anything. It doesn't look like they go to a cheap school or anything. This looks like a... So, but it feels like they molded... Whatever they may say, they molded on the polyclass case and needed to have the person who would see her be taken to make sure that connection... You actually got the kidnap down.
You need someone to witness it, because otherwise you don't get someone hearing the line.
Yeah, and so I think they started from the slumber party and then said, that's too obvious, we're going to have to work it back a bit. But possibly, as you said, they adjusted their age, so they'd have worked it backwards and said, okay, we'll have siblings sharing a room. Really didn't do the younger sister right, because she's come too young, but 13... you could just about buy that's still a situation you're going to be in. I still think they would have moved them into separate rooms by then, but you can just about bear that. But then they've had to scale her age up to try and distance herself from it, and now you've got an implausible situation in terms of teenage life. Because she's going to hate sharing a room with her sister at that stage. They're 15.
Oh, yeah.
That's unbearable.
There's a 4-year gap between me and my sister, and I think I would have murdered her when I was 15 if I was sharing a room with her.
Yeah, and so... But as you say, you need someone to witness it. And presumably, I don't know, would it have broken things if she'd had a friend sleeping over? Because you could have had that. Or would they possibly try to intervene?
I think that's the risk, is the 5-year-old isn't going to attack him.
Yeah.
Another 15-year-old might go for the killer.
Yeah, so I think basically the episode, the structure, at least the start of it, they were themselves into a corner because they were trying to adapt a real life event and make sure it wasn't too obvious, and that didn't work because everyone saw straight through that. So the moral of the story, kids, is don't base your fictitious crimes on real world ones, especially if they happened 2 years ago.
Yeah, a little too close for comfort.
What the hell? It's like people get twitchy about Ted Bundy, and that was ages ago. So maybe don't do this.
It's even to the degree of, if you ever have a murder mystery that's set on a lover's lane, you immediately associate the Zodiac.
Exactly.
It's ones that are that high profile and still in the public memory.
And it's I get the whole why people want to do it, because it's got lure details and it makes for a good hook, which is why
it's also something that you know has happened in the real world, therefore it's believable.
Yeah, but things like Dirty Harry laundered the Zodiac quite heavily. If you didn't know Zodiac was actually influenced Dirty Harry, that's not as easy to pick up, is it? That they're actually quite distant from each other.
You've also got one of the Exorcist sequels with the Gemini killer is very clearly the Zodiac as well. But again, if you didn't realise it was the Zodiac, you might not notice
Yeah,
it.
it's been laundered. There's enough distance there that it's been inspired by it, but unless someone sat you down and said, yeah, they sort of researched the Zodiac case and then wrote this thing, you're not going to pull the connection in the same way. But on the other hand, it's not like the actual Zodiac film, which is not going to hide the fact it's actually about these events.
It's based on Grace Smith's book.
Exactly. So it's that difference, isn't it? Because all the fictitious Zodiac ones before they did an actual film about Zodiac were careful to sort of distance themselves enough from the source that you could miss it because there wasn't enough as many precise details, were there? Whereas this is, we want to use this horrible real world case in our supernatural show about FBI agents.
I think the only positive thing you can say is Amy survives. Sadly, Polly did not.
I think I could buy it if that was the writer's whole thing. They somehow got fixated on this and they wanted a happy ending. Even then, you probably should leave this alone.
Especially when it's a child and especially when it's so soon.
Yeah, and writing advice, don't do this. I mean, generally don't write about serial killers because people tend to do fandoms about serial killers and then you get into a very weird situation we don't want to be in. I think the only reason the Zodiac hasn't got a bigger presence is because no one knows what he looks like.
That's part of the Zodiac's mystique, though, and why people are interested in it.
I mean,
all you have is that weird sketch they have of the kind of Ku Klux Klan-y looking guy with the bag on his head.
I mean, I have to say, as an aside, I thought that was hysterical in American Horror Story Hotel when he shows up to the serial killer dinner and he's just wearing the bag over his head. It's like, who's that? Oh, that's the Zodiac. Oh, of course it is.
It's a scary image, though, as well. It is.
But everyone else, though, was clearly depicted, but Zodiac is the only one in disguise.
Yeah.
Just because we can make a guess there's Arthur Lee Allen, but we don't know.
Alan's not the favourite even anymore. Yeah, it's one of these things that people will never be 100% on.
Because, well, their DNA evidence came to nothing, didn't it, ultimately?
Yeah. The missing cipher was solved recently as well, and that gave some other odd clues that pointed to someone else, but...
It's like Jack the Ripper.
You'll never be 100%, and there'll always be some shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, although I will point out the insane actual theory that someone had tried figuring out who Jack the Ripper was. I mean, I'm getting this from the From Hell comic, but Alan Moore is generally very good with his research. And one of the points was apparently someone postulated the theory of the only way you can find out who Jack the Ripper is if you time travel back to the bedroom of the last victim and wait. Because it's one of the only times you know exactly where and when he'll be.
True, that's a good point.
So for Zodiac, you could travel back in time to one of these other points because there's a few documented instances and ambush him. Then you break causality, so that's bad too. But the From Hell one was hilarious because the comment was, yeah, you can find who Jack the Ripper is, but now you're stranded in the past. Like, is that really your biggest worry of this plan? To find out who Jack the Ripper is, that you might get stuck in the past?
You know, it'd be mighty tempting just to solve the debate.
But then you need to express it to someone, unless you could actually send... Then you need to sort of hide your answer somewhere so it'll be picked up in the future. And not be destroyed by accident in the interim, so that someone else can then say...
Or be dismissed.
Or be dismissed, because what evidence do you have at that point?
I guess your only way would be to not only solve it for yourself, but ensure that he's apprehended in the past, thus changing the future so everyone will know who he was.
And in terms of... Depends on which level of time travel you subscribe to. If it's single stream, the whole timeline unravels and re-ravels again and basically nothing happens. Or multiple universe one where you'll wind up in a dimension where this is true. That's not your dimension anymore.
I don't like you very much.
I'm sorry. You can have the Back to the Future style one.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. But basically you have to get in and get out again with no one else noticing. Do you have anything else for this episode, though?
No, I think we've covered everything now.
Cool. Next week, we have another two-parter. Woo!
Yay!
Which would be Nisai and 731. This, in memory, was the first time that the conspiracy was not appreciated.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah, people were not kind to this one when it came out.
Okay. We'll find out why next week.
Yeah, I can't remember if it if it was as soon as Nisai or 731 where the regret kicked in. But yeah, so when I mentioned the edited together episodes previously, I remember distinctly the review for this one, which was 82517, which is a really catchy title, got like lowest rating of any X-Files released up until that point in time. So yeah, so this is going to be an interesting one. Other than that, we have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/thingsAreGettingStrange, where all being good this week, you'll find the first part of our Let's Play of the X-Files game, just called the X-Files game.
That's the FMV game from the late 90s.
Yeah. The other one, which sounds... I'm so amazed they did this. The Resident Evil style PS2 game called Resistance Serve. Resident Evil style... One of these... Yeah, I can see how you got there. Alone in the Dark might be a better one than Resident Evil, but we're splitting hairs, I imagine.
Yeah, I reckon it'll take us probably 6 or 7 episodes just to get through the first one. I remember it being several hours long anyway. So, but after that we'll get to Resistance Serve.
Yep. Which is set way later, so we'll see how that goes. If you want to get hold of us, our email address is thingsAreGettingStrange42@gmail.com.
Alternatively, you can find us over on social media. On Tumblr and Twitter, we are GetStrange42. On Mastodon, we are at GetStrange42@universedon.com. And on Facebook, you can find us just by searching for Things Are Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast.
Our theme music is Envision by Kevin MacLeod. You can find that on incompetech.com. Licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. You're going to make us say the creepy thing, aren't you?
I'm going to make us say the creepy thing.
Okay. Thank you all for listening. Until next week, remember...
Nobody's gonna spoil us.